I'm here today with Don Symons, and I want to thank him for being willing to talk to me today a little bit about his experiences in the field and about the history of HBAS.
Thank you for taking the trouble to come up here.
I'm going to start with a very sort of straightforward question. What discipline did you earn your doctorate in?
Biological anthropology.
Okay. And when did you really start thinking about human behavior from an evolutionary or an adaptationist perspective? Was it at that time, before that time?
It was long before that time.
Okay. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. In 1963, in the summer of 1963, I was junior, finishing my junior year as a psych major at UC Berkeley. And I took a summer course from a psychologist named Benbow Ritchie, who, his major field was the history of psychology, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even remember what the course was called, but he had just been bitten by the evolution bug.
Mm-hmm.
And so this whole course had to do with his view of evolution, and we read popular books. I think there was a book by Louis Leakey, maybe Dart, and a book called African Genesis by Robert Ardrey.
Okay.
I'm sure never read it, but
But I've heard of it, yes.
Ardrey was a popular science writer and a playwright, and this was a book about how humans descended from African killer apes. And it's a book that now I wouldn't even recommend as a historical curiosity, but at the time, it was just really inspiring. I mean, it was just exciting, this idea that whatever we are, we were created by selection over unimaginable periods of time in a world that doesn't exist anymore. And that just, it just really got me thinking, and I was not all that happy in psychology. I felt like whatever I had expected to get, I wasn't getting, with a single exception, I think, of the courses I took in physiological psychology, especially vision, which, and I think that sort of speaks to the rest of my career. That was the part that was really mechanistic, the part that, even though they may not have talked about adaptation, it was all about the nature of the visual system. And so I decided I wanted to change my major to anthropology, because at that time, if you were interested in evolution, the only place you could do it was biological anthropology, and which was really underway at Berkeley at that time, under the auspices of Sherwood Washburn. And so I thought about, as I say, changing my major, and I was well advised, I don't really remember by whom, to not do that. I had only a year to go to finish up in psychology and then become a graduate student in anthropology in limited status, and make up anthro courses, and that's what I did. So I got a BA in psychology in '64, and immediately went over and to the other side of campus, and became a graduate student of Washburn's.
And so, if you were thinking about maybe like when was the sort of the time period when you were first started thinking very explicitly about human behavior in that sort of adaptationist perspective, where would you sort of situate that in that?
Late 60s.
Late 60s.
And I don't remember if there was anything about life or anything that I'd read that triggered this. Maybe having read Adaptation and Natural Selection by George Williams. But at some point, it just dawned on me that men like a variety of sexual partners for the sake of variety, and women tend not to.
Right.
And why? Which I think everybody who's going to see this knows why. And at that time, it was just an idea. It was a neat idea. I liked that, and I didn't think of ideas in terms of careers and making a living at that time. It was just an idea. And at that time, Richard Dawkins was visiting assistant professor in the biology department, and I knew him. I actually had sat in on his course in animal behavior. I had taken animal behavior from somebody else.
Right.
I won't say who. And I thought it was good. But then Dawkins taught the same course, and sitting in on that, it was just a world of difference. I mean, everything fit together. It had a plan, it had a reason.
Right.
And it wasn't just a bunch of separate topics that were all unrelated. So anyway, I went over to Richard's office and told him this idea, and he said he had the same idea for the same line of reasoning, and I thought, well, that's great. That must be right. But that was the beginning of it. But as time went by, and I was thinking about sex then. I was a young man. I was thinking about sex anyway.
Of course.
And I started thinking about it from an adaptationist point of view, and the more I learned, the more everything seemed to me to fall into place. And I think maybe the pivotal thing that I learned was the differences in sexuality between gay men and lesbians, and especially in those days, quite a difference.
Big difference.
And I thought, aha, this is just men being men and women being women, and they're not being confounded by having to compromise with each other. And I think and I don't really remember when that was, but that started me thinking about, maybe I'll write a paper about this sometime.
And that was the start of things.
Yes.
Did you find those sort of days, like the early days, when you were thinking about things like that, and you mentioned people like Dawkins, in terms of like a sense of community, or did you think that it was kind of an isolating time for you when you were first starting to work on it, and it wasn't kind of the thing to be talking about or working on?
Well, I should have said that when I went into anthropology, I went into primatology. That was what I was going to do, and that was what was really big.
Right.
At Berkeley at that time, and it was a hot field.
Sure.
And it's probably hard if there are young people listening to this interview to imagine a time that was so different. And I'll tell you a little bit about the beginning of my career, and you can see that it couldn't possibly happen today. I'd be flipping burgers or something. There's no way that I could have succeeded now.
Okay.
At least with the mindset that I had then. So I wasn't isolated because I was.
You had that group.
I was in. I wasn't doing evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology didn't exist. I was preparing to study primates, and I made my living. I was a research assistant for Washburn, but what I actually did was to take care of monkeys up in the behavior station. So I was very comfortable with monkeys. I saw monkeys every day, and I was, I got to be very used to them, and I think that held me in good stead later.
In academia in general.
Undergraduates. So anyway, I was not. I was not isolated because I wasn't really. These were just ideas I had. I wasn't pursuing that, and since it didn't exist yet, it wasn't controversial, and nobody was getting ice water dumped on their heads or anything like that.
Right. It's interesting because I know some people, particularly Martin Daly, was also talking about that. That in fact, in the early days, often, especially if you were in an animal area in the first place, that there wasn't actually that much sort of controversy or uproar. It was actually later on, once the field started taking off and people started getting their panties in a twist about it, that things started getting a little bit more unpleasant that way.
It was the opposite. I mean, there were jobs, and I did my PhD research on rhesus monkeys and rhesus play in Puerto Rico, and I was funded by Washburn's grant, which I took for granted. I mean, it just that's how your professor has money, and you go to the field, and I actually had a job offer while I was in the field in Buffalo, and I said no, which really pissed Washburn off. But the climate is very important to me. Where I live is important, and I wasn't going to go to Buffalo.
Buffalo, I can understand that big difference.
But that was the milieu, and so I started the field work in '69 and finished in '70, and came home. The one thing I did do in the field was to typed up my notes every night. So I
Right.
just had that in a pile, so I had this huge stack of field notes
Right.
and a huge stack of Super 8 film that I was going to analyze, that I'd taken a play to see exactly what goes on during play. And I got a job. I had no PhD. I had no
Right.
publications.
Does not happen today, yes.
This is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And so I came, I there were two places in the world that I thought I might want to go. One was Santa Cruz and one was Santa Barbara. Job in Santa Barbara opened, and I was essentially hired by a biological anthropologist named Jerry Cybulski, who was here. He didn't have a PhD either. But you know, they didn't. This was this very laissez-faire kind of milieu.
Right.
And he was the only biological anthropologist here, and so the department said, you know, whatever you want. Candidates coming down and talk, and so he hired me. And so I came here without a degree, and I had to start working on that. It took me 3 years.
Wow. Okay.
Which is as long as you can be here without a PhD. So I was not an assistant professor, I was an acting assistant professor. And, you know, with a full teaching load.
Sure.
And I did get a lot of student help, which was very nice, free help.
Sure.
People were interested in
what you were doing.
working on this and analyzing field note stuff, and I was studying Super 8 film and whatnot. So I actually finished my PhD on the last day that I was up in Berkeley to get all the signatures. It was the last day that I had before I was out. And so I had like 3 or 4 hours to spare. And Washburn said to me the next day, he said, Don, you know, if you ever decide to get another degree, give yourself an extra day.
Yeah, that's probably
so that was the first squeaking through.
Right.
That I did. And then I felt like I put so much effort into trying to describe rhesus play, which I had actually gotten very excited about, because I felt like I was looking at it in a deeper way than anybody ever had for any species, and you know, adaptation is revealed in design, and I really tried to look at the design of play. Things calling animal play rough and tumble play doesn't get you anywhere. That's not a description.
It doesn't tell you what it's for, right? Yeah.
It doesn't tell you what it's for, and it's not a description. What I wanted to do was to describe it, and so I did the best I could with slow motion, Super 8 film, and so I put all this effort into it, and felt like you really can't communicate fully what it's like without a film. So I decided I need to make a film, and by then I had published one paper on why play is not designed to further communication skills in primates. So one paper in 3 years, and I was advised not to make a film because it would be useless for promotion, but I just ignored that and applied to the Harry Frank Guggenheim Foundation, which at that time was being run by Lionel Tiger and Robin Fox, who were very receptive to this kind of thing. And they gave me the money to go back to Puerto Rico with a friend of mine named John Bishop, who was a filmmaker, and we shot the footage over 6 weeks for what became a film, Rhesus Play. So I was doing that. But during this early part of my career, I really started to think of, in addition to working on the dissertation, I really started to think about sex and about writing something about it. And Don Brown and I actually co-taught a course on primate and human sexual behavior, which was great. It was a seminar. It was wonderful. Best teaching I ever had.
Right.
I really enjoyed it. And I was working out by doing that, I was working out a lot of these ideas and presenting them in the seminar. And so once I had the dissertation under my belt, I turned my attention to writing this paper, which turned out to be, I think, 120 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, maybe it's a book. It should be a book. And an editor from Oxford UP came by and was interested. And he actually sent the manuscript out.
Mm-hmm.
To whom I never did find out. One review said, this is fine, but we already know all this stuff. The other review said, this is all wrong. And the third review says something like, well, this is good, but Bob Trivers is working on a book, and why not wait for the real thing? So clearly,
yes,
this was, it needed to be. Oxford was still interested, but more needed to be done. And now I was starting to realize that I really had to, I had to start getting publications. And I didn't want to write papers. So that's another thing. Everybody wants to write papers now and get as many as possible, but I didn't want to. I had a lot to say about play. And I wanted to say it all in one place, and I wanted to say it in a place that was my place and not somebody else's journal. It would be my book.
right, okay.
And so I started writing Play and Aggression, which was easier to write than The Evolution of Human Sexuality, and it was an extremely good exercise because I learned what it is to write a book. You don't know that until you do it.
Yeah.
And it was a book in a way that this first draft of The Evolution of Human Sexuality was not really a book yet.
Okay.
But now I had written a book, and I was ready to go back and start on The Evolution of Human Sexuality, which is what I did do. But meanwhile, I'm not really publishing anything else.
Right.
I got 2 books. Time is going by. Play and Aggression came out in 1978. It was published by Columbia. And Oxford in 1979 published The Evolution of Human Sexuality. And so I was an assistant professor then, and I would be promoted, but not to tenure because I wasn't publishing.
Oh, okay.
And so I had been there, almost 10 years now, which is again, that's
Pushing
the limit.
Yes.
That's as long as you can be an assistant professor in the UC system. And so I would come up for reviews, and I would be, okay so far, but it would be deferred. So now it had been deferred as long as it could be deferred. And so the tenure committee met, the promotion to associate professor. I believe they had 9 extramural letters.
Okay.
All were in favor of promotion. One, however, was, and these letters are all anonymous.
Right.
But you
can
get to
sometimes
redact it. You can completely figure out all of them because it's a small world.
Yeah. And
so this letter that had reservations was by my old professor, Sherry Washburn.
Oh no.
And his view of Play and Aggression was it was the best thing that had ever been done in primatology. His view of the evolution of human sexuality was that it's sociobiology and therefore devil's spawn.
It's evil, yes.
It's evil. And he said, if Symons wants to do this, you should go and study with Ed Wilson, learn sociobiology. And at that time, Washburn was what's called a university professor. So he had sort of gone beyond the ordinary professor. And now he wasn't just a professor at Berkeley, he was a professor of the whole university system. There were, I think, 6 of them at the time.
That's bizarre.
He had risen to this exalted level. And so the committee thought, this guy has reservations. We can't, we've got to get more letters.
Right.
So they decided to get 3 more letters of people of their own choosing, not the department's choosing.
Okay.
It was a real crapshoot now. But time is running out. This was happening in the spring, and nothing is moving with this committee. June 30th arrives, and I'm done. So I'm no longer employed. So I'm collecting unemployment and going over and running into botanic gardens every day. And the fall gets here, and Elvin Hatch, who was the chair of the department then, calls me up and said, "Would you teach your course Anthro 5?" Yeah, whatever status I
Sure.
lecture, I guess, would
Yeah.
come back as a lecturer and teach this big introductory course that I've been teaching for 10 years.
Right.
And of course I said yes.
Sure.
So I'm back, still with marginal employment,
Right.
and finally 3 more letters come in, all recommend promotion. Total crapshoot. Could have easily been. Imagine that, could have easily gone the other way, but it didn't. So I get a call from Elvin Hatch. He says, "You're an associate professor." So it was a checkered career.
It's a long journey to get to that spot.
One that could not exist today.
That's true. I mean, I think, for students today, watching this, that's not something that they can actually imagine.
Don't plan on doing this.
Yeah, that's not the way to go about it. Now it's, you have to get this many publications before you're even finished your PhD kind of thing. So yeah, it's very different in that sense. If you were being asked to sort of single out any one particular contribution that you've made, what one do you think's had the biggest impact on the field?
There's no question. It's the evolution of human sexuality.
Yeah. This is probably going to be one of the most cited things.
I think I told you that in their book A Billion Wicked Thoughts, Ogi Ogus and Cy Gaddam say that I am the most cited living sex researcher, which surprised me. I'm sure it surprised a lot of other people that I'm considered a sex researcher at all. But then I questioned this. I was nice, but I questioned whether it was true. And Ogie sent me all the data.
Sure.
And he said, "Virginia Johnson is dead, isn't she?" And I said, "No." I said, "Oh, well." But now, of course, with her passing, maybe I'm the most cited, and I'm sure 90% of that is the evolution of human sexuality.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree. Do you think that you've had any particular contribution, any particular paper that you think has been overlooked, that you think didn't get the attention that it should have got?
I knew you were going to ask me this question. And I thought about it, and the real truth is, when I retired, I really retired. I stopped reading. Right. I sort of stopped that even a little bit before I retired.
Right.
Which was one of the reasons I thought it was important to retire. I thought the students really weren't getting their money's worth. I just wasn't. Sure. I wasn't really doing it anymore. And so I honestly don't know. I'm very fond of my paper on dreams. Called The Stuff That Dreams Aren't Made Of. And the argument that the sensory nature of dreaming is the senses that we experience during dreams, or at least that we experience in a hallucinatory way, are only those that won't compromise external vigilance. And so I don't know whether that's had much influence. There's a psychologist and dream researcher at Harvard Med School named Deirdre Barrett, who I know is a big fan, and I figured that if this had been disproved at some point, she would be a big fan. So I don't think it's been overthrown, but I don't know if it's
it was the biggest focus. Okay.
I actually, as you know, in the late '80s and into the early '90s, I wrote a whole bunch of papers, all very similar papers and book chapters, trying to argue that the basis of an evolutionary perspective, if you want to call it that, on human beings is adaptation. Right. That's the connection. That's the connection between Darwinism and what people do or think or are. And I really felt that was not being widely appreciated. It was appreciated here because of me and John and Lita. Sure. But not everywhere. Right. And so I tried to do something about that, and I guess I'm not so sure how much influence that whole group of papers have had. The adaptations of the beholder type stuff.
Isn't one beauty is in the adaptations of the beholder?
That actually, that was not, that was about the nature of female beauty.
Right, but it was also touching on those same
It was an
issues about the
adaptationist perspective, but
adaptations.
it wasn't arguing that other people, other folks are doing things wrong.
Right,
That's
the use and misuse.
Use and misuse, that was one.
Right.
Adaptiveness and adaptation.
Sometimes I think the issue just gets sidestepped now. People just sort of avoid discussing it, in a sense. Although I think that for a time that certainly was a hot topic. When I was a student, it was. But that was a while ago too, now.
Well, I learned a lot about it. I'm sure you remember that in Evolution of Human Sexuality, I give an explanation of human female orgasm that is not an adaptationist one.
Right.
Or the way I would look at it is it's a person who takes adaptationism seriously. And as a student of George Williams more than anyone else, that I believe that adaptation is revealed in design.
Right.
And the precision, the economy, the complexity, the stability with which particular effects are achieved, it couldn't be just a result of chance. You attribute those to natural selection. You don't just go and try to find some benefit that this or that thing might have, and argue that that shows it's an adaptation. Right. So when Elizabeth Lloyd published her book, The Case of the Female Orgasm, I of course read that, and it was a whole book defending my point of view against the literally 20 other adaptationist explanations or hypotheses about female orgasm. And I was dismayed to find how much the nasty things that people were saying about me. I wasn't aware of it because I wasn't reading anything when I read this book. And then when I saw how she was treated, and not just by the press, but by people in the field who had all these criticisms without ever reading the book, said, well, we know it's an adaptation because of this, as if Elizabeth might have missed that on a book she took 10 years to write.
Right. No, I agree. It's certainly been a contentious issue.
So, because of that, I really wondered how serious and deep people's adaptationism is even today. I know here it is because everybody here is a student of John Alita's.
Right, and the focus is on design.
They are absolutely. So I have no worry about UCSB students. Right.
No, I think that, yes, that you may have a point with that. That certainly I've seen a lot more papers that just look at the benefits. So assuming it is an adaptation because it's going to improve reproductive success, not necessarily looking at whether it shows any evidence that it was designed to do that.
That's right.
Right? So I think that certainly is something that still is a problem today if you go to HBS.
Contributing to sperm banks would be a huge adaptation.
Should do it all the time. Every time they turn around, they should be going there. Don't waste it somewhere else. But that doesn't seem to be the way it works. If you had the opportunity to rewrite any paper or book that you've done in the past, is there one that you would change, or are you happy with the way things turned out in the end?
I mean, I had the opportunity to.
Sure.
But
there's some effort required.
I don't have a will anymore. There are things in the evolution of human sexuality that were mistakes. And mistakes not in the sense that obviously I didn't have all the information that's come out in 30 years since that was published, but things that I should have picked up on. And the most egregious one is female skin color and attractiveness. Still bothers me. Because anybody who has read at all in the ethnographic literature about that touches on the issue of female attractiveness will notice that again and again one reads that lighter than average skin is perceived as most attractive. Not the lightest possible.
Right.
Albinos are everywhere.
Not attractive.
Right. But, so, I mean, very dark-skinned Africans, they don't they don't think that Europeans had the most attractive skin. When they first saw them, they thought that Europeans were hideous, but they like women with reddish
so
hue.
lighter on that hue, yeah.
So I knew this because I read a lot of stuff.
Sure.
But I was in love at that time with the idea that what should be perceived, things like skin color, that should be most attractive are the population average. That was my hypothesis. So I mentioned in passing this lighter thing, but tried to explain it away instead of explaining it.
Right. Okay.
And and a few other things like that. And so Pierre Vandenberg and Peter Frost came along and did what I should have done and really explained it. And it was a great paper. But I thought I could have been a contender on that issue.
If you've done
I resented leaving a low-hanging fruit for them to
for
pick.
somebody else. If you were going to give advice for a student entering the field today, what would it be, other than not to just write books?
I think writing books is good. Maybe you can't take that risk anymore. But if that's the case, that's a big loss.
I think you could probably do it. You probably have to do it in combination with other things.
You write books.
I do write books. Yes.
We wrote a book.
We wrote a book. No, and actually, that's one of the things I'm most proud of is actually that book. I think it's great. And of the books I've written, I'm more proud of that than I am of the others. But there was a topic that was close for me too. So
I am too. I really like that book, and I wish that book were wider read. I think
you might be surprised. I've heard people have come up to me and said that they use it in their classes and things.
I've always thought obviously it's a book you can read in a couple of hours, so it's not a textbook. But for an introduction, and then you have an introduction to the field, and then you have a specific example that's
unusual.
Pretty much, it's really, they probably maybe never heard of this before.
Sure.
I once had never heard of it before. And I guess I thought it probably hadn't done too well because you can buy copies pretty cheap.
Yeah, you can't have all of those little ones though. I mean, because they were cheap in the first place too. But what, if anything, has surprised you about the evolution of HBUS or the organization and just the field itself over the past 20 years? Anything surprise you?
I can't really answer that because the last HBUS I've been to was...
Right.
I mean, literally, yeah. So it's...
But even if you think...
It's been 14 years or so since I've
been it's been a while. And I mean, I think there have been changes, but although it was interesting, Martin was saying, well, it's, the field is about the same size, because if you look at who goes to the conference, the numbers haven't changed. The people change every year, but the numbers haven't changed.
The big thing I've noticed about HBUS is that I'm not there.
Well, that's one of the things that we hear a lot. So where is Don Symons? I'm like, he's hiding out in Santa Barbara.
The older I get, the harder travel is for me.
One of the things that sort of led to the idea of doing this series of interviews came from some of us sitting around and talking about the people that we had all heard give talks when we were students who aren't with us anymore. And so people like Dev Singh and Linda Mealy and Margot Wilson. Do you have any sort of stories or memories of people that were colleagues of yours that aren't with us anymore that you want to share with students in the field now?
Well, I remember the first time I think anybody else in HBUS met Dev. I'm pretty sure it was Albuquerque. And I was chairing a symposium on attractiveness. And Dev showed up. Hadn't registered or he showed up. He had this data, and he came and he said, "Could I get this?" He's showing me the stuff. These line drawing outlines of female waist to hip ratios, and so I said, "Sure." And that was the first time anybody at HBUS was introduced to
his stuff.
Dev was coming from a background in obesity research, And so he was, waist to hip ratio was just a normal
Mm-hmm.
thing to him, and because of all its health implications
Sure.
and fecundity implications. But it dawned on him that this,
Sure.
that this makes sense that it would affect attractiveness. And so anyway, he gave the last
Yeah.
talk, and I remember I was standing at the side and seeing women up in the back row whipping out their calculators, figure out their waist to hip ratio.
It's actually, when I talk about that kind of work in my class now, I actually often point out the secretary in our department as an example, and she gets really upset when I do this. But she's actually got almost like a super stimulus ratio. She's quite skinny, but she has big hips. And so she's like the extra super stimulus for Deb's study. And then the students all go and look at her afterwards, and they're like, oh my God, you're right. And then she gets really upset. But she's a perfect example of that. So.
That this has just popped into my head is a story that Deb told me once about when he first came to Texas to be a faculty member. As far as I could tell, his English was completely fluent. I don't know if it was a first language or not. But, anyway, he had some problem, and he went to see the dean and told the dean his problem. The dean thought about it, and he said, well, if I were you, Deb, I would do such and such. And so even though he was either native or fluent speaker of English, that happened to be an idiom that he had never heard and didn't know what he was being.
Sure.
And he said he was up all night thinking about this. What could that possibly mean? And finally he decided that what the dean meant was that the dean was offering to do this for Dev. So the next day, Deb went into his office and thanked him for the offer, but said he really thought it'd be better if he did it himself.
That's great.
Margot and George Williams. I mean, I loved them. They were dear friends, and I miss them terribly. Hard not to.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's tough. I think sometimes, so many of the people, they become such good friends, right? Your colleagues, and you work together, and you become, really good friends. And that's one of the tougher things, I think, is seeing things happen to people along the way.
In the case of George, my first interaction with him was in 1979 when Oxford sent galley proof to the Quarterly Review of Biology for review. And George at that time was book editor. He later became editor, but he was at that time was book editor. And he read the manuscript and wrote me a long, single-spaced typewritten letter. He had a few little criticisms, but it was extremely favorable, and it was coming from. If I had a hero, I've never been even as a kid, I sort of didn't have heroes, but if I'd ever had a hero, it wouldn't have been my dad, it wouldn't have been some sports person, it would have been George Williams.
But then that makes it really special.
And so needless to say, I still have that letter. He predicted in this letter that there would be a new ology named after me, which needless to say did not transpire. I say he was wrong about that, but so that started a friendship. The advice I would give to the students who might be watching, I'm sure whenever they're watching this, it's still worthwhile to read Adaptation and Natural Selection until, in the words of Richard Dawkins, until you feel it in your bones, and you'll do better research, you'll be better able to evaluate other people's research, and you'll be in contact with one of the great evolutionary minds of the 20th century.
I think that's great advice.
Steve Gollan, just to continue to finish this off, Steve Gollan was, when he was at Harvard, he was a TA for Bob Trivers, and he would have these meetings in Trivers' office, and of course Gollan would get there, and Trivers wouldn't be there.
Of course.
Smoking dope somewhere. And so Gollan spent a lot of time hanging out, waiting for Trivers in his office, and he noticed that that there was this one book on the shelf that seemed much worse
Mutilated.
shape, than all the other books. And he pulled it out, and it was adaptation, natural selection. There was writing in the margins, the spine was falling off. There were marginal notes and post-it notes, and so that was the influence apparently it had on Bob.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today and sharing your experiences with our audience.
Thank you for